Hello and welcome to the Middle East Report, I should say shalom. And in this programme today we shall be discussing the Lincoln Jewish Memorial Stone dedication that took place back in September. And also in this programme we shall be honouring those brave Jewish men and women who served with the RAF during the Second World War. And in this programme today I'm joined by Tim Collis from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, UK, and Paul Hyams, who retired from the RAF after 31 years of service and is also representing the Jewish community in Lincolnshire. So warm welcome to the programme. And Tim, it's good to have you back on the programme. I thought you did an outstanding job the last time you were on, telling us the story of the Lincoln Jewish Memorial, how it came about, the history of Lincoln in its relationship to the Jewish community, particularly the horrendous anti-Semitism during the Middle Ages, and now how this stone represents a new chapter in the city's history, but also in terms of Jewish-Christian relations. Just share with us again, give our viewers a little bit of a reminder and a background story as we're now on to the sequel of this incredible and inspirational story.
Thank you, Simon, for inviting me back on the programme to share the sequel to this incredible journey and the story of the Lincoln Jewish Memorial Stone. The reason why Lincoln is so important in Jewish history and Judeo-Christian relationships is because Lincoln was the centre, was a real root of medieval anti-Semitic actions against the Jewish population, not just in Lincoln but in the UK, but also across Europe as well, based on the blood libel lie fantasy that developed in Lincoln, was ratified by the king and celebrated by the church in Lincoln itself, and for hundreds of years there was been no memorial to the slaughter and the murder of Jews based on the anti-Semitism that had that root in Lincoln. It expressed itself in our literature, in Geoffrey Chaucer's In the Prioress Tale is mentioned about the boy of Lincoln who was allegedly murdered by the Jews, and it also spread into the Holocaust and the mindset of the Nazi regime, who actually cited the Lincoln blood libel as one of the justifications for murdering Jews in the city and across Europe.
Excellent. And Paul, it's a pleasure to have you on here, not only representing Jewish service men and women who served with distinction in the Royal Air Force, but also representing the Jewish community in Lincolnshire. Can you share with us something about your Jewish background and also what attracted you to join the Royal Air Force?
Well, thank you for inviting me as well.
Absolute pleasure.
Simon. It's lovely to be here. I was attracted to the Air Force as a boy because I always wanted to fly, and protracted way of getting to it. A couple of mini careers before that. I eventually got to the Royal Air Force, and as you've already said, I did 31 years flying various conflicts, including over in the Middle East. And as far as Judaism is concerned, I didn't really follow a particular religion whilst I was in the forces. My heritage is Jewish, and I came back to Judaism really during COVID. I studied with a rabbi at the Ark Synagogue in Northwood, who I've just visited the Ukraine with for the second time. I had my bet din in London to affirm my Jewish heritage. And basically, we've got a very small community in Lincolnshire, approximately 25 families. But we are building up because we have some Jewish students there now, and they're becoming very active. So we're trying to build the community back to a little bit of strength. It'll never be as big as it used to be, but we're getting there.
It's great to know the community is building and getting stronger, because when we think of the Jewish community, you either think of North London or Manchester, possibly Glasgow, Edinburgh, maybe a small community in Cardiff, but it's nice to know you're part of a small but vibrant Jewish community there in Lincolnshire.
The Northerners, Midland and the Northerners will say that there are a lot of Jewish communities. Leeds have got quite a big community, and there's a large-ish liberal community in York as well, which also suffered during the Middle Ages.
And Paul, what are your thoughts on the brave Jewish men and women from this country who served with the RAF with distinction during the Second World War and contributed so much to the war effort against the struggle against Nazism and tyranny in Europe?
There was an awful lot of Jews that wanted to serve and serve with the Air Force because they saw that was a way of getting back at Germany. But it was a bit of a two-pronged sword because being Jewish and flying over Germany with the possibility of being shot down and captured, doubled their bravery.
No, absolutely. And you're wearing a number of different badges. You've got the RAF badge there as well, but you've also got the ICEJUK badge, which is representing the Association of Jewish Servicemen and Women. Share with us how important it is that there is an association that looks after Jewish men and women who have served right across the armed forces, and share a little bit about the history of this unique association.
Well, Jews have served in the British Army since the 1800s in various roles, and of 6 million men that served in the First World War, 50,000 of them were Jewish, which not a lot of people know. After the war, quite a few of the survivors started meeting up in ex-servicemen's clubs, and in 1921 a group of Jewish veterans got together to form an association, and that's when they laid the first wreath at the cenotaph on Remembrance Day. In 1929, with the rise of anti-Semitism, which you mentioned earlier, and fascism in Europe, Jewish veterans grew concerned, and a meeting was held in the East End of London, the centre of UK Judaism at the time, and the Jewish Ex-Servicemen's League was formed. That was changed to the Jewish Ex-Servicemen's because it conflicted with the Royal British Legion. So it's make it slightly different. And that was in 1936. At the same time, King George V gave permission, a royal decree, that the Jews would commemorate the wars at the cenotaph the week after the normal cenotaph parade. So they've been parading ever since, and I was at the recent one.
Oh, amazing. Well done. Thank you. And Tim, just share with us how the Lincoln Jewish Memorial Stone ended up at International Bomber Command in the RAF.
It was really by default. We'd searched on the one. Lincoln is between two hills. With the cathedral is sat on one hill, and we'd knocked on every door possible to say who would want, which organisation would want to host this memorial stone, and we drew a blank. No organisation actually wanted this stone, which was quite shocking. And when the stone, because the stone was carved in Jaipur in India, and it was on its way, it wasn't going to go back. The sponsor had paid, Phil Kerry had paid for it to be carved and then transported all the way from Jaipur. And halfway to arriving in the UK, we still had no location for it. And I was still knocking on doors, even while it was en route. Who would want to host this amazing, most beautiful memorial stone to the Jews of the city? In December 2023, the stone arrived, and we met with a group including Paul and other members of the Jewish community of Lincoln. We saw it at the home of Phil Kerry, who donated the stone, and part of that meeting was saying, where's it going to go? And we just said, we just don't know. And it seemed like everything was a blank. Every door was shut. And somebody mentioned, I can't remember who mentioned it, said, well, what about the International Bomber Command Centre? And I do remember clearly saying at that meeting, but what's the link to the Jewish communities? There's got to be a link as a memorial to the Jews. We've got the memorial to remember the medieval Jews of the city, but what's the link to the Bomber Command Centre? I went home that night and I thought, I'll better do a little search. Something prompted me to do a search on the internet, and I was shocked to see the number of Jews who'd actually not only flown with the RAF, but had flown with Bomber Command, but had actually perished with Bomber Command voluntarily. which was amazing. So I penned a very quick email to the International Bomber Command saying, we've got a memorial here, memorial stone. You know, would you consider hosting it? Would you consider it being set here? And the reply was so positive that the Board of Trustees has unanimously agreed for it to be hosted at the Bomber Command Centre.
Wonderful. So now let's see this excellent video that's been produced by International Bomber Command in Lincoln, and it shows you the true dedication for those who serve with distinction at Bomber Command during the Second World War, including many Jewish men and servicewomen during that conflict.
Here we memorialise every single life lost in Bomber Command, without whom we may be telling a completely different story in a different language. The pandemic had a massive effect on the centre. We were lucky enough to receive just under £500,000 from the government's Cultural Recovery Fund, which was absolutely vital to keeping us afloat, really. But also it allowed us to put in place a lot of things that will help us be sustainable in the future. Things like PV arrays and our changing places facility, new sheds for storage on site, also digital totems so that we can share messaging across the site, and importantly something like our Dig for Victory garden, which encourages youngsters and volunteers. Some of the structural things that we were able to do means that the business base is sounder, which puts us on a better footing for the future. This place is so important to so many people that in itself is hugely important.
And that was courtesy of International Bomber Command Centre in Lincoln. And if you haven't been, I want to go, and definitely worth a visit. Paul, share with us how you got involved with, I can kindly say this, Tim's crazy project with the Jewish Memorial Stone, to rewrite a new chapter in terms of the history of Lincoln in its relationship with the Jewish people.
Well, luckily there was emails sent out and the other Jewish community that's in Lincoln passed the information on to my community, and we got together, and that was the first time I met Tim at Phil Kerry's property, and it was the first time that everybody saw the stone.
And share with us your thoughts on this stone and how for the first time, I think, in Lincoln's history was really kind of marking the horrors that took place during the Middle Ages against the Jewish communities there, but also paying incredible tribute to those Jewish servicemen and women of the RAF who served during the Second World War.
Yes, definitely twofold. The Jewish Lincolnshire Jewish community are well aware of what happened in the Middle Ages, but obviously it's not particularly well publicised. So having the memorial stone there, people hopefully ask. They'll look at the website that's associated with it, and they can see the history of what actually happened. And it's, as Tim said earlier, it wasn't just in Lincoln that the atrocities happened. As I've mentioned, York, at Clifford's Tower, there was a massacre up there as well, and also Norwich, and it did spread through Europe and obviously ended in the Second World War, really. But it continues, and as in our early conversation we talked about Amsterdam, it does continue. I think it's quite pathetic that it's a memorial to the RAF Jews that served, having, as you said, done 31 years in the Royal Air Force. Lincolnshire is Bomber County, and it is still very active in the Royal Air Force today. So it's a wonderful location, and it's a wonderful memorial to those that did fall.
Wonderful. And Tim, just share with us as a Christian why it was so important to rewrite a new chapter in terms of Christian-Jewish relations, particularly after the horrendous past during the Middle Ages, and also with the growing rise of Jew hatred that sadly seems like it hasn't gone away anywhere.
Yeah, it's somebody coined the frame reversing the curse, and the medieval anti-Semitism was almost like a curse on the city and on the nation because of the blood libel, and we wanted to put a marker and support the Jewish communities by saying we want this to end. We want this to be a memorial which had not existed, because for 800 years there had not been a memorial to the Jews of the city, and also a specific memorial to the Jews who flew in Bomber Command. And we wanted to fulfill the commandment in Isaiah 40 verse 1, which says, comfort my people. And we knew that the lack of a memorial was grievous, not just grievous to the hearts of the Jews, but grievous to God's heart as well. And we wanted to put something right. We wanted to put it right and put a marker that spoke, and this memorial stone now speaks.
And Paul, share with us the important friendship that you've been able to develop with Tim, but also with Phil Kerry, the quarry owner, who out of his own pocket funded the rebuilding of the replica stone, which is the Magdala stone that was discovered in the Galilee back in 2009, and it was dated back to the pre-Second Temple period, which is extraordinary, with extraordinary pictures and designs, which is definitely Jewish and also very biblical in its picturing.
Well, the original Magdala stone is the oldest representation of the menorah that has been found. The stone is absolutely beautiful. When we first went to see it at Phil's house, we had a good look through it, around it, and Tim explained why it had been done the way it had been done, and the design was near enough perfect. But what I noticed when we were looking at it, the sun shone on the stone, and there's a grain in the stone that actually mimics the menorah as well. So dragged everybody over, and we all had a look at this micro glasses, really, just so we could actually see it. But it is definitely there. There is a grain in there that is quite pertinent. Reasonably good friendship with Tim, very welcoming to our community, and it was super to meet him, and we have kept in touch. We've exchanged a few presents. I gave him a translation of the Tanakh, so hopefully you're at least a third of the way through it by now. That's why you're not sleeping at night, yes. But yes, the ICEJ have been very welcoming to us.
Yeah, wonderful. And Tim, I think we have to also in this programme really pay a tribute to the bravery, the courage, the sacrifice and the dedication of the Jewish people during the Second World War, who served right across the armed forces, including the Navy, the Army and the Royal Air Force, but we'll be talking about the RAF now. So according to my notes here, it's extraordinary to think that some 20,000 Jewish people that represented 6% of the Jewish population at the time served in the RAF during the Second World War, and that 907 sacrificed their lives during those dangerous missions, flying the Lancaster bombers deep into German territory.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. Not many people know that fact at all. From a huge proportion from a relatively small Jewish population, sacrificially gave their lives, and as Paul said, knowing if they were going to be shot down, it was double jeopardy. They could be killed in the air or killed on the ground once they were captured because they were Jewish. And it's just phenomenal, the sacrifice they made on the most dangerous missions. They were often in the Pathfinder missions, in the first wave going out to drop flares, for the following bombers to come, for the following wave of bombers to come in, and which was where they could be shot down even more. So it's just an incredible sacrifice from a relatively small population. And as Paul said as well, that many have kept their identity hidden, so we don't know the exact number, and it's likely to be many, many more than we actually know about.
Yeah, and Paul, according to my notes here, the Jewish community back during the time of the Second World War was in the region of 370,000 to 390,000, much bigger than it is now. This is according to the US State Department. Share with us how the untold story of how 20,000 Jewish people served with the RAF during the Second World War and their contribution that they made to the British war effort. Do you think that they were more motivated because they knew about the anti-Semitism that was happening under Nazi Germany. They knew what was happening to the Jewish communities that were occupied by the Nazis across Europe.
Definitely. It can actually go back to the First World War when a lot of Jews served in the Royal Air Force because they were tailors by trade, and they actually made the fabric for the planes and covered the planes. So that's where the association with Jews in the Air Force really started. But as you've just mentioned, being in the Royal Air Force and flying over Germany and dropping bombs was a direct way of getting back at Hitler.
Yeah. Oh, and we also know, for example, there's been many stories where Jewish pilots or Jewish servicemen would actually wanting to serve with the RAF because they knew that this was an opportunity, as Paul rightly said, to really strike back at the Nazi regime for really the horrors of the Holocaust. Even though they might not be aware of the true extent of what the Nazi regime was up to, they would certainly be aware that Jewish communities would have been targeted by the Nazis, and many of those who probably escaped from the horrors of what was happening on the continent of Europe, made it to England, would have shared the horrors of what their community faced. But share with us kind of like incredible stories, for example, where you do have some very brave and courageous Jewish servicemen who wanted to wear a Star of David, even though they were told by their superior officers at the time that if you carry out this mission, you are shot down, you are caught by the Nazis, you're going to be treated absolutely horrifically. But because they were proud of their Jewish identity and they were proud to engage in this fight against Hitler and the Nazis, meant that they didn't really care.
It's like today, they knew they're in an existential war. They knew what was happening to their families in Europe, their family, friends. Many of them that came from Germany came over, were translators, radio operators. They knew that the success, the survival of their families depended on their success, so they were prepared to lay their lives 100% on the line, even unto death. Which is it's an incredibly acts of bravery from the Jewish community, their motivation, because their families were being murdered and executed and wiped out, and it was an existential war for them.
Yeah. Paul, what do you think this is one of the forgotten stories of the Second World War? The fact that, according to the Yad Vashem, that 1.5 million Jewish men and women fought with the Allies during the Second World War.
Definitely. It's not brought up in normal history lessons, and that sort of history is becoming very unpopular anyway. But yes, it's definitely a hidden number, and the education needs to get out to the schools so that people do know, and it might reduce anti-Semitism to a certain extent when they realise that's the sacrifice that the Jews did.
But this also changes the narrative, doesn't it? Because when I've always been fascinated by the Second World War. I've always been fascinated by the history and the military history of everything that was involved in that. And the Jewish people are always considered the victims, particularly with the Holocaust, the murder of over 6 million precious Jewish lives in the Holocaust by the Nazis on an industrial scale. We know about the Holocaust, we know what happened to the Jewish people, but we don't actually hear the story of the fact that there were 1.5 million Jewish people that actually fought alongside the Allied forces to actually defeat Hitler and stop the Holocaust. And this is an important narrative, isn't it, to not only the Second World War, but also to the Holocaust as well.
It is, but after the Second World War, everybody that came back and survived really didn't talk about the war and their experiences. And the Jews just came back and just got on with their lives. The education does need to get out there, but it's something that we've never really pushed.
And we see that in Israel, they're wanting to rechange this education regarding the incredible role that the Jewish people played during the Second World War, fighting alongside the Allies against the Nazis. And this is a museum dedicated to the Jewish heroes of World War II.
After the Nazi occupation of Poland, the war began to spread throughout the world. The Germans and their allies made a methodical effort to eliminate Jews from the face of the earth. But the Jewish people did not surrender. They fought back. against those who persecuted them. Join the armed forces en masse.
When most people think about the Jewish people in World War II, they picture the Holocaust. Now, the Chaim Herzog Museum of the Jewish Soldier in World War II seeks to expand that perception.
There were 1.5 million Jewish soldiers who participated in the war. 250,000 of them were killed during the war, and nobody mentioned that. So this museum, as I say, it is a kind of changing mind.
Retired Brigadier General Zvi Kantor is one of the founders and CEO of the museum. Kantor served in the IDF for more than 30 years. He says that while Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center, covers the story of those murdered in great detail, there's another chapter that gets lost.
The way of education in Israel, because of concentration in the Holocaust, and nobody say, listen, yes, we suffered, we had a lot of victims, killed 1/3 of our people, but on the other side, we also participated in the war and we contribute to the victory on the Nazi Germany.
The interactive experience starts with a time elevator that depicts volunteers like Chaim Herzog, who later became Israel's first president.
Now you're on the deck in Pearl Harbor. You see the Arizona, the Japanese attack. You understand that the state fought in the Pacific, the state fought in North Africa, and they invaded in Normandy. We say when America joined the war, it became the World War. Let's go to the next wing, and we are entering to the Jewish ghetto, and through the breakthrough, we are going to the forest to join the partisans.
There in the forest, visitors are waiting with the partisans to blow up a train. When you reach the end of the museum, there's a shift from the victorious end of World War II to the battle for the new state of Israel just 3 years later. That's when they formed the Machal Brigade. It consisted of soldiers from other nations who had already fought in World War II and then came to help the fledgling state.
We had only underground, and suddenly the War of Independence, you had to operate battalions, brigades, tanks, artillery. That knowledge is no in the underground. Somebody brought it from where? Why we don't talk about it?
The new museum is at Latrun, Israel's official memorial site for fallen Armored Corps soldiers, known as one of the world's most unique tank displays. A special garden at the entrance to the Jewish Soldiers Museum tells the story of war.
War is blood, red, black, smoke. There is no life.
The statue behind me is dedicated to around 4,000 soldiers from 43 countries, Jews and non-Jews, who came to help Israel fight in its war of independence.
On the other side, we built the garden of the blooming of the state of Israel.
Even before its opening, the museum had a special impact with an American connection. The Jewish Institute for National Security of America, or JINSA, brought a group of retired generals and admirals to the museum. CBN News spoke with 2 of the U.S. tour participants. Retired Vice Admiral James Malloy said it opened his eyes to history he didn't know about.
When you say Jews in World War II, the thing that comes to mind is Holocaust. If you say Jews World War II fight, then the Warsaw Uprising comes to mind and maybe some partisan fighting, but that the Jewish people amongst the countries of the Allies joined the armed forces in mass and then performed superbly, heroically as patriots and set the stage for Israel after the war.
Retired U.S. Army General John Campbell said he would have liked to spend a lot more time there.
I thought it was fascinating to see the resilience, the bravery, and the way they've broken out the museum. You kind of go down and you spiral in. It's got the use of technology there is pretty amazing. It's got video, it's got movies, it's got touch screens.
The museum also houses a library and database with plans for a research center. So far, they have collected the stories of some 30,000 Jewish soldiers and names of hundreds of thousands of others. So they're hoping relatives and friends of other soldiers will register them on the museum's website. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Latrun, Israel.
And such an important museum in Israel to honor the brave heroes of the Second World War, those Jewish heroes who fought alongside the Allies, 1.5 million. Sadly, one of the forgotten facts of history. Tim, just share with us as well, I mean, we're talking about the Jewish contribution during the Second World War, but it's incredible to think that one of Israel's presidents, Isaac Weizmann, actually flew in the Battle of Britain and flew the Hurricanes and the Spitfires.
That's right. At his speech at the dedication of the Lincoln Jewish Memorial Stone, the Chair of Trustees of the IBCC, retired Air Chief Marshal Sir Michael Graydon, gave a talk, mentioned that Isaac Weizmann was a pilot in the RAF in 1942 to 1945 and became a personal friend of his, and they kept contact right through until Isaac Weizmann's death. There's so many facts and connections that the people just don't know, and the contribution that Jews made to the war effort and to our freedoms that we enjoy today.
And Paul, one of the amazing stories, and I've only got to know about this recently through interviewing Holocaust survivors, it was particularly the high number of Holocaust survivors that have actually flew with the Israeli Air Force and actually been part of those major wars that Israel's been involved in, from the War of Independence to the Six-Day War, which was an incredible victory for the Israeli Air Force, together with the Yom Kippur War as well, and that so many of the pilots were actually survivors of the Holocaust.
As we discussed earlier, when they went to Israel as survivors, they felt that they have to defend the land, and the Air Force is by far the best Air Force and way of defending the land. And as you just mentioned, it's been proved time and time again that the Israeli Air Force is a superior arm. So they were founded, and they're the fathers of the IDF, or the Israeli Air Force wing of the IDF.
So it's just an incredible story. And Tim, do you want to share with us the dedication of the Lincoln Jewish Memorial Stone that occurred at RAF International Bomber Command Centre back on the 8th of September 2024?
Yes, it was, thank you. It was an incredible ceremony, incredibly moving, and it harkened right back to the original anti-Semitic action, which was at the time of a wedding, a Jewish society wedding back in 1255, which turned into absolute tragedy. And the dedication to Memorial Stone, we had representations from the local councils, the local communities, Jewish communities, church leaders, that we had the Bishop of Grantham. It was just an incredible moving ceremony, and it was almost like a wedding in itself, with so many representations, and like any wedding, there was tears, there was hugs, there was great food there as well. It was just an amazing ceremony, and the sun broke out just as Rabbi Samuel de Beck-Spitzer was giving the blessing over the stone, over the ceremony. The sun broke out. It was just heavenly almost in its whole feel and presentation.
Yeah. Paul, what did it mean for you? Not only that the fact that you served 31 years in the Royal Air Force, but the fact is you're also representing the Jewish community in Lincolnshire.
Well, originally when it was deemed that it was going to be a memorial to the medieval Jewish community, I was really pleased, because, as we've mentioned time and time again, Jewish history is not really talked about very much, and this is now a focal point for people to see. It harks back to Israel and 70 CE, as you mentioned, pre-Second Temple time. But to have it at the International Bomber Command Centre and associated with the Air Force was very moving for me, as having served 31 years.
Excellent. So let's have a look at this incredibly inspirational video as produced by the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, UK, that talks about the dedication service for the Lincoln Jewish Memorial Stone that took place back in September.
On behalf of the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, the International Bomber Command Centre and the Jewish communities of Lincoln, I welcome you and thank you all for being here today at this historic and memorable event in the city of Lincoln. The Jewish Memorial Stone is a fulfillment of a dream of many to see a memorial in our city dedicated to both the historic Jewish community of Lincoln and also to the Jewish airmen of the RAF and Bomber Command who sacrificially gave their lives fighting for our freedom.
Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to formally dedicate in memoriam the Lincoln Jewish Memorial Stone.
At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
Avinu Shabashamayim, our Father in heaven, Rock and Redeemer of Israel, we come before you in prayer and supplication, and we mourn the loss of many thousands of women, men and children brutally murdered in anti-Semitic attacks over many centuries on these shores, and pray for their souls. In addition, we mourn the loss and remember over 600 UK British Jews who fell in Bomber Command amongst the 57,861 men and women from 37 different nations who died in the service or support of Bomber Command. Oseh Shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru, Amen. May he who makes peace in high places bring peace for us and for all the people of Israel. Amen.
Citing that memorial stone here is exactly the right place to put it. I can think of no more appropriate place indeed to do it. But I think also, and if I might say so, that Queen Elizabeth, our late Queen, whose death we remember 2 years ago today, would have thoroughly approved of what we have done here today. So I thank you all for the opportunity to look after, to cherish the Jewish Memorial Stone. Thank you.
For the Christian world, the very testament that they read states, be careful. What you do with this people because you do not support them, but they support you. And even as we talk, they fight for their very lives in a tiny piece of land, no bigger than a game reserve in my home country, called the Kruger National Park. We appreciate you. We thank you for your sacrifice. We remember that you died in those Lancasters.
It's just an honour to be able to be a part of that, to remember them. My uncle survived, but so many didn't. So that is something that we should all remember.
Not only do we want to bring comfort to the Jewish people in honouring them, but we also want to be bridge builders. That's our goal, and we hope from this that we will build stronger bridges and links within the Jewish community.
Well, we're delighted to have this here. I think it's such an appropriate place to have it. The 600 air crew in Bomber Command were Jewish. So to have this Jewish stone here is a delight. We're proud.
To have the Jewish aircrew remembered this way is absolutely amazing, and it's a wonderful place. The location here, twofold, is wonderful to memorialise the Jewish aircrew that were lost in the Second World War, and also overlooking the cathedral, but slightly lower down you've got the Jewish quarter of medieval Lincoln, which is wonderful.
So many people in the public don't realise how much or how many Jewish people took part in the war, volunteered, served in all of the armed forces, and therefore obviously so many of them also lost their lives and paid the ultimate sacrifice. So to have somewhere that commemorates that, and specifically the Jewish element of that, is a wonderful thing to have.
For 800 years over this city we've had silence, we've not had a memorial stone to the Jews who suffered terribly from anti-Semitism. So we pray that this stone will speak its wonderful message of remembrance, reconciliation and hope for many generations to come.
And that was an incredible video that does mark a new chapter in the city of Lincoln in its relationship with the Jewish people, rewriting a wrong during the horrific years during the Middle Ages, but also honouring those brave and courageous men and women who were Jewish who served with distinction with the RAF Bomber Command. Tim, were you surprised when you had the vision, God gave you the vision, and then surprised by the sheer number of dignitaries that you had for the memorial or the dedication of the Lincoln Jewish Memorial Stone?
It's actually incredible how we just sent out the invitations. We said, this is what's going to happen, this is what's going to take place. We sent out a blanket, and the response was just so overwhelmingly positive from dignitaries, and it was so right. Because when we looking at reversing what had happened many hundreds of years before, it was it was the crown, it was the church, it was dignitaries, all had their hand in this terrible anti-Semitic episode of the city. And it's so entirely right that the finale, the culmination of that, the end of that was also accompanied and witnessed by so many dignitaries, the mayor, the mayoress, the sheriff of the city, bishops, heads of other churches. It was just absolutely so right, but also very moving that so many came to witness this incredible event.
Yeah. And Paul, share with us as well, I mean, we saw high echelons there within the Royal Air Force, together with the kind of first rabbi that's been appointed to the Royal Air Force, as you told me, since the Second World War. Really wanting to acknowledge the incredible role played by Jewish servicemen and women in the Second World War, particularly with the RAF Bomber Command. Share with us how they wanted to honour those Jewish people who sacrificed their lives for our freedoms today.
As we've talked about, there's very little in history available to people. There is a website which is associated with the stone that people can look at, and the database of the Jewish servicemen is actually on that, which has been extensively researched privately. But no, it was wonderful having Sir Michael Graydon there. His speech was wonderful, as we said, and it was only fitting that the new RAF rabbi did the blessing. He jumped at the chance when I sent the invitation to him, and as you saw, he did a wonderful job, and it was wonderful having him there.
Yeah. And how do you think the city's changed now, spiritually now, Tim, from having the dedication service for the Lincoln Jewish Memorial Stone there, and also recognising the incredible role played by Jewish servicemen and women with the RAF and also RAF Bomber Command, which is the centre in Lincoln?
I think there's been a lifting of that sense of weight and grieving over the city for decades. You know, talking to Christians and other people in the city, there's been a sense of something is wrong. Something is wrong about the city. There's something that is heavy and it's burdensome. And anybody talking with anybody about the Jews of the city, they always bring go back to the terrible blood libel allegations and the executions and the murder of the Jews sanctioned by the Crown and the Church in the city of Lincoln. That was just grievous, and we feel that grief has now been lifted off hearts, and people are now saying you can go to this memorial, this site, and it speaks. And what is incredibly fitting, we didn't know at the time, but the site of the IBCC on that hill is the site of where the very first Jew of Lincoln was hung in Lincoln on the orders of the king. It was the very place where the first death of a Jew in Lincoln took place.
That's incredible. And does this change your community as well? Knowing the very dark and evil history of Lincoln and its treatment of the Jewish people in the Middle Ages, does this now give a bit of ray of light for your community in Lincolnshire?
It does. It's, as Tim mentioned, it is a relief that the history is out there now, and there is a place where people can go to memorialise what happened. And again, it's fitting that it also memorialises the RAF airmen that lost their lives in the Second World War.
Yeah. And Tim, also I think the timing of this was very significant, because this was in September, just before all the high Jewish holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and then Sukkot. But it also was in that time when the build up to the first anniversary of the biggest mass terrorist attack in Israel's history, committed by Hamas back on October the 7th. And since then, we've seen an unprecedented rise in Jew hatred, not only in this country, but around the world. But share with us how the dedication of the Lincoln Jewish Memorial Stone is a wonderful success story in light of the rise of Jew hatred, and how Christians like yourself are making a difference by standing in solidarity with our Jewish community.
It's just incredibly miraculous that at this time of anti-Semitism, rising anti-Semitic actions against Jewish communities, around the world, that we've been able to do this. There's been a hand, we call it the hand of God, that's just orchestrated this and allowed events to take place, for it to actually be placed there and dedicated there. And there wasn't so much as we never heard of a sound. There was no other sounds apart from the sound of the voice of this memorial in our city, in the midst of every other city's experiencing anti-Semitic voices. There was no anti-Semitic voices for this dedication. Amazing.
And Paul, share with us your thoughts on this one, because sadly we've seen such a huge increase in attacks on our Jewish community in this country. We know that the Jewish community is fearful, they're scared, they're anxious, and it's a terrible time. But share with us how this actually is a good news story that we can all celebrate, particularly the Jewish community.
It is definitely a good news story, and I was talking with Tim while we were getting ready for the interview, and there's been an awful lot of interest with visitors going to the International Bomber Command Centre, actual interest in the stone. So much that Tim's had to produce some more work for the guides that are actually showing people around, so that they can actually increase the knowledge and education of the local populace. And people come from all over the country to visit, and worldwide. It is a wonderful place.
Excellent. And Tim, what's been the response of the organisers of the International Bomber Command Centre in Lincoln? I mean, firstly, it's incredible how they accepted the Lincoln Jewish Memorial Stone in the first place, but then to place it in that strategic position that overlooks the actual cathedral, and how they are proud to embrace the Jewish history of RAF Bomber Command and the role that the Jewish community played in fighting for our freedoms against Nazi tyranny.
Yeah, it's just incredible, because as much as we were honoured for the stone to be placed in such a prestigious place overlooking the city opposite the cathedral, the International Bomber Command Centre were honoured to receive it at that location. So it's just a win-win. And from that place, as Paul mentioned, I've been very soon, within a few days after the dedication of the Memorial Stone, I was contacted by the IBC saying, can you present some educational material, because people are asking about it. They're saying, can you explain to us? And we want interpretive material for our guides to give out. And also it's now on the IBCC does guided tours of the site. site, and they said they want to include the Memorial Stone talk in that guided tour.
That's incredible, isn't it? And I mean, Paul, you've got to be impressed, haven't you? I mean, not only did you serve with the RAF, but you're also representing the Jewish community in Lincolnshire, to have the Lincoln Jewish Memorial Stone there, but also the fact that the International Bomber Command Centre actually love the stone and love it being there, is probably a testimony to them, but also a testimony to the RAF as well, isn't it?
It is. It's, as Tim said, it's a win-win situation. The memorial's there for the original reason, to memorialise the medieval wrongdoings, but also to show a memorial for those that lost their lives during the Second World War, the Jews specifically, and having it there in a central location that overlooks the cathedral, but the old Jewish medieval quarter of Lincoln. It's a wonderful location, and it couldn't have gone any better place.
And Tim, for any viewers who are watching who maybe they're in York or they're in Norwich or other places where we saw horrendous pogroms against the Jewish people during the Middle Ages, share with us how they can pray and make a difference by doing what you did in building a strong friendship and relationship with the Jewish community and rewriting an historical wrong that took place during that time.
Yeah, I think it's just dealing with what you have in your hand, and just engage with the Jewish communities in your location, in your cities, not just in York, not just in Norwich, but all over the country, in towns and cities, Northampton, Leeds, saying to the Jews, how can we engage you? How can we support you? I read of an account where a church group went to a synagogue and said, how can we support you? And that church and the synagogue, I think they're removing the mezuzahs from their lintels on the doorposts, and then the Christian community said, well, to counter that, we will actually put mezuzahs on our doorposts. I think so. 300 Christians then put mezuzahs on the doorposts of that same city and town. So it's just thinking outside the box, and what we have is just our engagement with the communities and just helping where we can and offering and say, how can we help you? How can we stand with you in solidarity at this very tragic time?
Yeah. And Paul, how can, as Christians, how can we help you and the Jewish community in Lincolnshire and throughout the rest of the UK, wherever we find ourselves, particularly at this time of rising Jew hatred? Because sadly, we've seen that it's unprecedented. It's very similar to that of the 1930s and 40s, and the Jewish community is under attack and feels threatened. What role can we play to help reassure your community that you're not alone during this very difficult time?
Show understanding. Show community. Just reach out. As Tim said, it's already happening, but reach out. If you talk to people, we will all get along an awful lot better, and basically try and learn from history, and let's not repeat history.
Yeah, and I think Paul raises a very important question, isn't it, that we can all be involved in, the importance of learning about history. So learning about our nation's history as it relates to the Jewish people, particularly through the Middle Ages, which is your specialist subject, Tim, but also what we're unpacking in this programme, the incredible contribution made by the Jewish community, not only in the First World War, we haven't even touched on that, but also during the Second World War, and particularly their role that they played with the RAF and those brave Jewish men who went with RAF Bomber Command and flew the Lancasters deep into enemy territory, into Germany, on dangerous bombing raids at night, knowing that if they got shot down or caught by the Nazis, the consequences they would have faced would have been horrific. But they put their life on the line, not only for the freedom of Europe, but the freedom that we enjoy today.
Yes, as I think Paul mentioned, there is a website, lincolnjewishmemorialstone.co.uk. We want to differentiate from the Lincoln Memorial in the USA, so it's lincolnjewishmemorialstone.co.uk, and it has so many links to information, the Jewish database of World War II, of pilots, air crew. It's just vast, and it just takes a few clicks of a key to say Jews in World War II, Jews in World War I. we're in an the information is out there. It just needs that little bit of digging to find it. Visit the International Bomber Command Centre. The people are incredibly welcoming there. There's a lot of information. It's full of books. There's a really good restaurant there to visit, very good food. So the information is there. It's just getting it out there.
And of course, a big component of the Jewish community is education. So share with us why it's so important that we understand and learn about the Jewish contribution to the war efforts, both in the First and Second World War, particularly as it relates to the RAF. Cool.
I've been reading quite a bit about the history, and I've been amazed at the contributions. As Tim says, the information is there if people want to find it. Hopefully with the memorial at the International Bomber Command Centre, it's more readily accessible now for people, and hopefully when the visitors go there, they'll just spread the word.
Excellent. And I suppose the other question we have to ask as well is the role that Christians need to play, particularly at this time with rising Jew hatred. This is a demonstration on this programme together that Tim, you're on with Paul here, to show solidarity and support. Just share with us how we need to pray and step up our activities for the Jewish community, particularly at this time of unprecedented Jew hatred, to stand up to the hatred and the vitriol that's being directed against our community, considering how much our Jewish community actually gives back to our nation.
Absolutely. One of the criticisms of the German church in World War II was their silence. They kept silent, they didn't speak out. But now is the time to speak out. Now is the time for almost like the reservists, those sitting and saying, oh, I disagree with this, or I want to support the Jewish people. As I said, it's so easy to do a quick email, do a quick message to the Jewish community. They're on the one website. There's a Jewish small communities network of Jewish synagogues and communities. And I only read one article, I think it was the Derby Jewish community, saying they're asking for help with their headstones for their graveyard. And Christians can actually look at these and say, well, I can help that. I can send a message of support. And in the early days of the what's going on from October the 7th, we sent letters of support to our Jewish communities, and it's just making that initial contact. It's very welcome.
So Paul and Tim, thank you so much for being my guests on the Middle East Report today. Both done a great job. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you for watching this programme at home. There can be no doubt that the Lincoln Jewish Memorial Stone is an incredible example of writing a new chapter in the history of Lincoln, and also shows as Christians what we can do to support Israel and the Jewish people at this critical time. So thank you for watching this week's edition of the Middle East Report.